Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the new Rebel Clash stuff, go ahead and check out the Poketown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using the code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are looking at the cards just announced from Infinity Zone. We have the full set. This is going to be part of our August set, Darkness Ablaze. Do bear in mind that because this is being released in August, it pretty much lines up pretty close to the rotation that has already been announced, where it will be Team Up on. So we're going to be trying to discuss these as we go, but I may miss here or there cards that are rotating. Just bear that in mind. I've had a quick look at things that are rotating, and I'll try and keep that relevant in the discussion. But yeah, this is pretty much my first impressions. I've skimmed the set once, and yeah, these are going to be some pretty raw ideas. I'm basically just having a flow of consciousness as I read these for only the second time. So let's jump straight down to the trainers, and we kick off with Cheer, Yell, Horn. Pretty simple effect. It just says each player's active Pokemon is now confused. I personally can't see this being that good. Very situational. It has to be used when you can pivot your own attacker, or you're using a different attacker, or maybe even not attacking at all that turn. And also has to be used when you're not knocking out the opponent's active, and they also need to be in a spot where it's hard for them to simply just pivot out of it. Now, in the format that we've had pre-rotation, there's been a lot of Jirachi-based engines, which has led to a lot of switch counts in very high counts. Malolana as well currently is being played with Eldegoss or Mewtwo scoop-up net sometimes. So people have many ways of getting around status right now. That might slightly change with a skateboard going. It makes Jirachi a little bit less free to roam the board, but I expect confusion to not be that strong. One of the sort of archetypes I would have seen this be potentially decent in is like a replacement for Mareep Sleep as a package. But Oranguru is rotating, so I don't really know where control fits in all this going forward. So at the moment, I don't see much home for the Yell Horn. Don't see it being that great. We have Turbo Patch. It says, flip a coin. If heads, choose a basic energy from your discard pile and attach it to one of your basic Pokemon that is not a GX. I'm happy it doesn't say a GX, because now we're not going to get cheesed by a Turn 1 ADP thanks to this card. And it does make it a little bit more limited. Obviously, there's still a decent amount of powerful V Pokemon out there. It could make something like a Dragapult that much faster. Obviously, you already sometimes have discard energy in the Dragapult lists. You play, you know, like 8 Ball Search cards that can all discard energies early. You play Viridian sometimes if you want to. Acrobatics are rotating, so that's something good, I guess, but there's still Dene and Research, so it's not hard for us to bin off energies early on. Flipping heads is probably less odds than Max Elixir was back in the day, so I wouldn't get too over-ecstatic about this card being printed. Straight 50-50 shot, once you've already had some prep time, is much worse than Elixir, where you basically always are able to just slam that card down. And if you stack your odds by having, you know, like 11, 12 basic energies, which a lot of lists did back in the day, like Turbo Darks and stuff like that, you had way above the 50-50 shot. So I think Turbo Patch is a little bit less useful, but it can still put a shift in, especially if you are going to be one of these VMAX decks, and the V has some, like I just said with the Dragapult, a 2 energy attack that can do relevant damage. You can get in there swinging a little bit earlier and getting relevant tempo down, which can sometimes be a really big deal if it's knocking out a Turn 1 Jirachi or another like evolving Pokemon, stuff like that. So tempo is always good. Turbo Patch will be experimented with for sure, but it does seem significantly worse than Elixir, so don't get too worried about it just yet from dominating the format. We have Rare Fossil. The way that we get the new fossils incorporated to this set is a 70 hit point colorless basic Pokemon. When you put it down, anytime during your turn, you may discard this card from play. It can't retreat and can't be affected by status. But yeah, just an extra 10 hit points. A nice mini buff, I guess, and cool artwork. We're going to do a lot of artwork appreciation. I actually do like the artwork on a few other cards in this set. It's something I always like to do with the first impressions. We have Toughness Cape. The maximum hit points of the basic Pokemon this card is attached to is increased by 50, excluding GXs. So obviously we do still have Big Charm. That was just in Sword and Shield. We are losing, I think, Frying Pan, so potentially this is the best defensive tool you could put on a Zacian, if you're thinking of maybe like Luke Metal Zacian, something like that. So yeah, 50 is a big hit point buff. Obviously it's usable on just like basic one prize stuff as well. Potentially a new addition to Spiritomb for some really crazy plays, bigger than the Charm, of course. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't think it's like essential, especially with Tool Scrapper in the format. You don't want to lean into this too much, but definitely seems you know, comparable in power to something like a Fighting Fury Belt of old. Fury Belt was obviously better because it had damage modification inbuilt, and 40 was a bigger number back then than it is now, as 50 hit points because of the scaling of hit points in general and attacks in general. But this seems like a decent card. It can also be a nice potential counter to some Dragapult damage counter placement on some bench tech Pokemon as well, so you can actually have stuff more reliably sat there and living, which can sometimes be good. We have Mountainous Smoke. When the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack, your opponent puts any prize cards they pick up into their discard pile instead of their hand. So it's basically turning their attack into Burst GX because they're putting immediately into the bin. This is ultimately a very passive tool card. Yes, you are hand disrupting, I guess, in a way. Resource disrupting, but it doesn't sound great to me. If you were trying to remove resources, there's... I mean, like, you're also denying draw at the same time, so it's, like, not as good as a reset stamp. It's not as good as just, like, even the Cursed Shovel. It seems like a midway point between those two and pretty much ends up worse than both, I would say. Bird Keeper. Switch your active Pokemon with one of your bench, then draw 3 cards. Before I realized that a skateboard was rotating, I thought this card was actually crazy good, because if you had it with Jirachi package, you get to play a supporter that draws you 3 cards and lets you Stellar Wish. So it's like it reminds me of a Misty's Determination, but instead of discarding a card, you get to keep 3 and then get a free Stellar Wish. So that sounded really, really nice synergy with Jirachi, but obviously a skateboard is rotating, which makes its synergy a lot less viable. Now there are some Bird Keeper style keyword Pokemon that we'll talk about later, but it doesn't seem to be too strong. Bird Keeper still may find a niche in something like a Zacian, potentially over a Malolana, or in addition to a Malolana as like a one-of, just so you have more pivoting options. I wouldn't sleep on this card though. I thought immediately that it was like very, very solid with Jirachi package, and even with board rotating, getting 4 cards, and of those 4 you see 8, that's still like actually pretty good value. It's kind of like a Sinlin, but you can get more immediate cards off of it. So it seems like I'm comparing it to all these other things, and I'm like, yeah, that's all pretty decent, and it's situational switching that can get you out of tough spots. So yeah, I think if you're playing Jirachi packages still in the new format without board, Bird Keeper seems pretty okay. I'm not saying it's like a 4 of in anything other than the Bird Keeper list, but it could have just been like, you know, something that you could scoop up Net Mewtwo and have the option of using a one-off, something like that. We have Peers. Search your deck for a dark Pokemon and any 1 energy. Reveal them and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. This doesn't say basic energy, so I'm assuming we can grab some of the new special energy stuff, which is pretty exciting. There's some good special energy in this set. There's a dark type special energy and a decent colorless special energy. But this could be a pretty decent card for sure for dark decks. I think especially if your dark deck can afford to play some special energy like Capture Energy, Piers becomes a very good early game supporter because it can get you your basic, and potentially the Capture Energy gets you another basic Pokemon down, so it kind of works as an attachment. And it's like a Sonya, but it gets 3 things instead of the 2, but then also has that late game synergy of also helping you get evolutions. We know that Obstagoon's a thing. There's also a new Obstagoon in this set, which looks promising. And there's, of course, Eternatus. And you can always go ahead and use Piers to be a pseudo-draw option if the dark Pokemon you grab is the new Crobat V. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure that Piers is going to be a decent card. Kind of sits in between the Karina and Volkner. Both cards have seen a lot of play when they were around. and it's not specifically dark decks that have to use Piers because Crobat's a card. So yeah, seems like a pretty good supporter, especially if you can abuse some early game special energies. That sounds really, really good to me. We have Rose. You get to choose 2 basic energy from your discard pile, attach them to one of your Pokemon VMAX, then discard your hand. We'll look at Rose Tower in a second, but usually discarding your hand is not something you want to do straight away, especially when you're not drawing any cards in response. But to be fair, with the hit points of VMAXs, a lot of the time, you sit with a VMAX and you normally expect it to be around for 2 turns, and you expect it to be carrying you a decent amount. So as long as you're setting up a VMAX with Rose, you're pretty much just like, yep, that VMAX is there for 2 turns no matter what. You got to deal with that amount of hit points. Good luck to you. So even if you don't have things set in place, you can still go for panic options with Rose and just make your VMAX try and make a big push. I think it's really nice to have a card that makes some of these clunkier VMAXs that we've seen in the past actually have some better acceleration specific to them. VMAXs kind of did need a push. I feel like something like a Toxtricity could really use this, even if it is just like a one-of, because at the moment it kind of feels like the Toxtricity deck can fizzle sometimes. So Rose could be okay for that. It could be okay for like a Stonejourner, Fighting being an excellent typing going forward, because you can punish Crobat V and you can punish Eternatus. And Pikarom doesn't die. It does lose Thunder Mountain and Volkner and E-Power. So maybe it drops quite a bit. But, you know, Bolton and stuff like that. Lightning is still going to be decent, I would say, as long as Coco Prism's around. So Fighting seems to be okay, and Stonejourner could really use some acceleration here and there. I think there's a few things where Rose could be interesting. And obviously, with the synergy of Rose Tower, you mitigates the downside quite a bit, I would say. So yeah, it seems like a promising card. Again, doesn't feel like you're going to play like 4 copies of this and that's going to be the entire attachment engine for the most parts, but it could weave in as a bit part player for sure. We have Spikemuth. Whenever a player's Pokemon is moved from the active to the bench during their turn, put 2 counters on that Pokemon. It can be a nice way of manipulating additional damage onto stuff. Imagine playing just like a bunch of Fione and trying to get as much Spikemuth value as possible in a random like spread deck. Could be pretty fun. And just Gust in general seems okay. Obviously you're punishing your opponents from just using regular switches and all that stuff. Punishing a Jirachi package even more. So seems promising. I think potentially meme-worthy, but also could just be like a new good stadium in the things like Dragapult, where you're already punishing and getting extra damage counters around the board. So yeah, like I said, promising card. Some meme potential there as well, which I think is pretty cool. It's a worry that that's where my mind immediately went, just trying to spam Fiones all the time. Kind of like the Flapple deck idea that never really worked, but now it can be with less deck spaces, more consistent. Fun times ahead with Spikemuth. Let's go. Alright, then we have Rose Tower. Once during either player's turn, that player may draw cards from the deck until they have 3 cards in their hand. It's a Rangaroo, but on a stadium, and if you know me at all, you know that Instructor Rangaroo was one of my favorite cards in that era. And yeah, I'm excited for Rose Tower as well. Obviously, I just mentioned Rose. This can be a little internal synergy here where you Rose your hand away and you can at least top yourself back up to 3 cards. So you have something to do afterwards, which is good. But just in general, being a potential stamp proofing option where you force your opponent to also find a stadium bounce is pretty cool. Now, obviously, your opponent can take advantage of this as well, so you have to be careful in that late game where they can't just lock you out. And I imagine you'd only be playing this in a more aggressive deck. You're probably going to be the aggressor for sure, because you don't want your opponent to be able to close out their game plan if this is your counter stadium to their sort of stuff. So I think typically this goes in more aggressive style decks, but I definitely foresee it being decent and obvious synergy with Rose if that's the VMAX. But yeah, I like extra card advantage and just topping up your hand size in general. We have a lot of cards that have discard synergy right now. Even like the Tag Call package has discard synergy all over the place with like Guzhala and stuff and Aurora Energies. So you could do that, lower your hand size and Rose Tower your way back up. So yeah, definitely a funky card. We saw that Rangaroo as a bench sitter was very, very good at stamp proofing mechanism. Obviously, stadiums can be dealt with a lot easier than an Oranguru, so it does feel initially weaker than Guru, but I can see that card definitely fulfilling a few niches in certain decks. We have the Hide energy. As long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, it provides Dark, and the retreat cost of a Dark Pokemon it's attached to is 0. Very, very nice. There's some chunkier Dark Pokemon out there. I'm thinking like Galarian Weezing potentially could now be a hit and run style Pokemon if you want to have the Hide energies on there for some Mimi fun. But also this is just like a nice way of moving your Crobats out the way. It can be a potential option for your Eternatus, so if it tanks a hit, you can then just hide into something else, rose onto your new target, and suddenly there's a second Eternatus they have to deal with. Stuff like that. Making Obstagoon have free retreat makes it a lot less worried about confusion and stuff like that, because you can just easily retreat and not worry about like removing your energies. So yeah, definitely a nice card. Seems like a really, really nice option. Now, do bear in mind, special energies can receive a lot of hate right now in the format. There's obviously Giratina Scoop Up Net being a card. The more special energies are printed, the better that Giratina Scoop Up Net combo gets, so something to bear in mind. We have Powerful Colorless Energy. As long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, it provides Colorless. The attacks of the Colorless Pokemon this card is attached to do 20 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon, so to get the damage buff, it has to be on exactly colorless Pokemon, so that's definitely quite weak. I can't think of many good colorless Pokemon in the game right now that deal damage. Maybe something like Cramorant or the Double V. That's really about it. Maybe a push towards like the Salamence VMAX or Snorlax or something like that, but it all sounds a little bit niche for me. It all sounds a little bit niche, but maybe I haven't had a good enough look at the colorless options that we have out there. But my initial instinct is that there aren't that many good attacking colorless Pokemon out there, and also this competes with the likes of Recycle Energy, Capture Energy, Draw Energy, all those sorts of things. So it's a lot to compete with for sure. Alright, that's the initial rundown of the trainers. Let's jump back up, as I've lost my mouse, to the top, and we can look through the Pokemon. Some in more details than others. I will be skipping some of the less interesting stuff. One quick note on Carnivine. Seems like a pretty busted cube card. Just letting you know that it has 90 hit points as a basic, can help you draw cards, and has Hit and Heal, which traditionally in Cube is busted. So yeah, just a quick note there. We have the Simmies in this set. So we have Simisage, Simipour, Simisear. They all have the same attack, and it all costs 3 colorless for 110 with that Giga Impact. So potentially some 3 CE, let's hit stuff for weakness style shenanigans going on. But with Ditto Prism Star rotating, I'm a lot less enthusiastic about a sort of archetype like that, seeing as though they all evolve from different little guys. But yeah, if you need to have a stage 1 counter to something that's either fire, water, or grass weak, it could be interesting. I think the most promising one is probably the Pansear, because you can potentially one-bang Zacians. So yeah. We have Rowlet, and it has 50 hit points, which is kind of Monka-esque for sure, because Dragapult's a card. But Dragapult gets a lot less viable with Eternatus being a new inclusion from the set, so maybe it's actually okay. But it has this ability Sky Circus. If you played Birdkeeper from your hand during this turn, ignore all energy in the attack costs of this Pokemon. So it can attack for free. With Wind Pebbles, you do 60 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. A 60 Snipe is relevant, pretty okay for sure. You have to have used Birdkeeper, so it's kind of it's going to be a mini theme. There's a couple other cards that have the keyword of Birdkeeper, so this is just like your little sniper you can get in here. So something to bear in mind. We have Art Appreciation for this Dartrix. It looks absolutely pog. And we have this Decidueye, which seems to be a bit of a headache for sure. It's a 140 hit point grass stage 2 with the ability Forest Camouflage, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks of your opponent's Pokemon V and Pokemon GX, and it has the Split Arrow attack for grass colorless. You do 90, and and 20 to 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So with that Forest Camouflage, it immediately kind of reminds me of something like Obstagoon, or maybe even Vileplume that we saw from Burning Shadows, I want to say it was, where it just says no to certain cards. Covering GX and V all in one go means that basically it's just one prize stuff that's concerning. By the way, I'm pretty sure the word V encapsulates VMAX because that is the same text as Scoop Up Net. So it's basically only able to fight against one prize stuff, fellow one prize cards, which sounds really good because you have 140 hit points, you're pretty chunky. 90 isn't the best damage output. The 2020s can help out against things trying to evolve against you. So I don't think you'll... I feel like if you can build a Decidueye army against someone, you might be able to just run them out of their tech cards. So I think you're only really losing to dedicated one prize style decks. So it actually seems like pretty reasonable as a counter deck. Like I said, it's kind of comparable to Obstagoon. It has that one colorless attack cost as well, so it can take advantage of... whoa, is Countergain still in the format? I need to check. One sec. I've got my little cheat sheet here. Countergain does go. Okay, so that makes it a little bit harder for you to fight 1v1. So if something can just sort of blow up a Decidueye, it does make it that little bit more difficult. So yeah, it's kind of difficult to set up. You do still have Rowegg, so if you want to do the strategy that Ross Cawthon did with his Spiritomb deck, where you have your tag team using that early attack, and then you just scoop up the tag team and you're left with just single prize Pokemon, you could try and do that with Rowegg, build a couple Decidueyes, scoop up your Rowegg, and suddenly your board is just single prize Pokemon and life's difficult for the opponent from then on. Especially because the Rowegg doesn't require energy attachments for its setup attack to super grow your dudes, so you can commit your early attachments to your Rowlets and stuff like that. So yeah, potentially interesting. I feel like it's comparable to Obstagoon. Obviously the raw damage that Goon does is more because you have the zigzag pings and you have the actual Obstagoon coming into play damage, but this Camouflage sounds super annoying, and it will certainly make people build decks differently because no one likes to just lose to an ability getting online, be it from a Rosa or from a Super Grow, something like that. So yeah, annoying card means that we're going to have to play some one prize tech Pokemon in most of our decks. Couple notes on that as well. Baby Blounds and Spiritomb both lose a couple big pieces in this set. Baby Blounds loses Fiery Flints, and it also loses Heat Factory. Spiritomb loses Rainbow and Hustle, so that's a little bit annoying. And Malamar, although it's not really seeing play since Dragapult came out, obviously that Giratina and the Malamar itself is rotating as well, and basically all the Mali attackers die. So a lot of the one prize stuff that we've seen in the format recently is getting weaker, at least. So it could open the door for something like this to be an annoying counter deck for sure. We have Houndoom V, 210 hit point fire type basic with 2 attacks, Searing Flame for 20, and your opponent's active is burn, so it's like 1 for 40 basically. And we have the Compensation Flame for fire colors, you do 100. If any of your fire Pokemon have damage counters on them, this does 100 more damage. How are we damaging our fire dudes? Is there any easy way that I can think of? Maybe your own Spike Muff, something like that. It kind of reminds me of what's it called? Drampa, right? It's like a Drampa GX kind of effect. 200 for 3 with Welder Synergy is not too bad actually. That's decent damage output. Decent type coverage as well. I think the card's okay. Yeah, it definitely seems alright actually. Pretty efficient. Yeah, I don't think he's going to set the world alight, but it seems like he could be built around. It's kind of jumped through a couple of hoops where you're trying to get the welder going and you're also trying to get this damage online on your own dudes. But it may prevent your opponent from like prodding you early, which could be interesting. Yeah, seems okay, I guess. We have a Blaziken line. The Torchic can help you get a basic out, which I guess is something. The Blaziken really reminds me of the Gallade that we had from Cosmic Eclipse. It's a 170 hit point stage 2 fire type, but also has the ability double type, saying that it's also fighting. Now, fire and fighting are some pretty good types. I said this exact sentence when I was talking about Gallade last time, where Psychic and Fighting were good types at the time. Now, Firefighting is pretty good because you can punish Zacian, you can be good against Eternatus as well. So, something to bear in mind. It has an attack cost of Fire and 2 colorless, you do 130, and you can attach a basic energy from your discard to one of your benched Pokemon. Having some additional acceleration helps offset this annoying attack cost that you have. Yes, you can Welder, you probably will be playing Welder, but you are a stage 2, so there'll be times where you're needing to use other supporters, the likes of Rosa, the likes of just drawing in general to get, you know, multiple Torchic down and all that good stuff. So I think this is probably going to end up being too clunky. Gallade seemed to be a less maintenance card, and it still didn't work. So yeah, I don't have high hopes for Blaziken, but a nice ability for sure. There's a Simisear that I mentioned. It can 3CE knock out a Zacian, and obviously Frying Pan rotates, so yeah, they can only get around it with like Big Charm or that new cape. We have a Galarian Darmanitan. It attacks for water, even though it's a fire type, and the artwork is pretty crazy as well. Frozen Heat does 110 base, and you may discard all waters from this Pokemon. If you do, you do 60 more damage. Now, it's not easy to power this guy up because he is fire, but do bear in mind that the Darumaka is a water type, so you could potentially play Frostmoth Darmanitan as a fun deck, but the damage output really isn't worth it, to be honest, so nothing more than fun. More artwork appreciation, because Suicune's a beast. Not good enough to push Frostmoth at all, it's just kind of vanilla. We did see the Fossil earlier, and now we see some Fossil supports in the form of Relicanth. Fossil Search for a colorless allows you to search your deck for 2 rare fossils and put them immediately onto the bench and then shuffle your deck. This means, in theory, if you are going to try and build around one of these fossil-style approaches, you can literally just play 4 Relicanth, or less if you want to. In your list, you could play 1 Relicanth and then just the 4 rare fossils if you want to, and get that Fossil Search going. That could be pretty interesting as a concept, and buy yourself a bunch of space and just rely on the rare fossils from then on if you want to. Even if you're not just playing like just the fossils or whatever, this Relicanth could be a good lead for some of the more bench sitter style fossil Pokemon that we get in this set. There's the Pampor that can do the 3CE for 110. There's the Darumaka that's obviously just a water type, so it can be mouthed onto. We have a Vanilluxe, sticking true to its nature by paralyzing things, this time with the ability Freezing Cold. Once during a turn, if this Pokemon is your active, you may flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active is now paralyzed. Coin flip paralysis, it does have a 2 retreat cost, so it could be like ballooned in and out of, but I don't think it's all that strong. Like I said, status conditions aren't in the best spot right now because the amount of switching cards that we're just playing naturally in our decks, I can't see that changing too much, so it's a lot of work just to try and get coin flip paralysis going. We have a Toxapex that isn't doing much. We have Dreadnought V and V Max. Dreadnought V, 210 hit point water type with the ability Hard Shell. This Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attack, so it is certainly chunky as a regular 2-prize Pokemon. It does have that awkward lightning weakness down at the bottom, but do bear in mind Pikarom does get substantially weaker in the next set. We have Power Bite, which does 3 for 130, and the defending Pokemon can't retreat. Not really lighting the world on fire. But we do have the Dreadnought VMAX, 320 base hit points that retains that Hard Shell ability. You take 30 less damage from attack, so you really are a big boy. That's a pretty chunky guy, a lot to get through. And it has the G-Max Stone Surge, 160 damage, flip a coin if heads, 80 more damage, so reaching that 240. Pretty okay. Again, like 160, decent number. You can at least knock out Dedene's guaranteed. But other than that, you're looking in that 2-shot range, hoping people 2-shot you back. There are a lot of attachments. We've seen that Inteleon VMAX hasn't done much at all in the format. Now, obviously right now, Pikarom is way better than it would be, so maybe life gets a little bit better for the likes of Dreadnought and Inteleon, maybe even Lapras, but we've seen so far 3 VMAX water types, and none of them have made a dent in the format so far. This one doesn't look so much better than the others that I feel like it would. We see a couple of these Fossil-type Pokemon, so Dracovish evolves from Rare Fossil. It has the ability Primal Law. If this Pokemon is your active, your opponent can't play any Pokemon from their hand to evolve their Pokemon. It is a 150 hit point stage 1 as well. That's pretty chunky. And it has the Hammer in attack, water, colorless, 120. Obviously, big basics have ruled the game for a few years now, so I think this probably won't be good enough. It can be frustrating for VMAX decks, and maybe you can like 1v1 them just in a sort of two-shot war, and hoping that their regular V Pokemon doesn't have efficient enough tax to deal with this 150 hit points that you have. So maybe annoying, but I'm expecting if there's things like Decidueye roaming around, and this Dracovish being a card just means that people are going to have not a pure here is my VMAX, I'm going to start swinging at people. People are going to have tech attacking Pokemon, and that makes me think Dracovish is going to be a little bit less viable. We do have the Arctovish. It has 150 hit points as well, which is pretty big for a stage 1, to be honest. And you have that water double colorless attack cost for 90 during your opponent's next turn. This takes 60 damage less from attacks. So again, just a pretty thick boy. For a 1-prize Pokemon, you're only poking for 90, which isn't really like great damage by any means, but that reduction is annoying for sure. 130 and your opponent's active is asleep. That's super expensive. But yeah, I think these are a lot of hard work, but I don't think their actual payoffs are that good. But their hit points is pretty appealing, that's for sure. We've got a Manectric, but again, lightning types get really neutered because we lose Volkner, Mountain, and E-Power, so that's a shame. We have a new Zero Retreat Koko. We have this Dracozolt, 160 hit points. It has Rising Charge for a Lightning, 30, and during next turn does 90 more. That's terrible. Giga Impact is 200 for 4. That is also terrible. Whoops. We do have the Arctozolt. The ability is Numbing Vortex. Whenever your opponent attaches an energy from their hand to one of their Pokemon, to put 2 damage counters onto that Pokemon. So it's an annoying bench sitter that can be additional damage. It kind of reminds me of like old Ampharos that we've had in the past. Obviously, it being on a annoying stage 1 is like kind of okay. We've seen Flapple flop, and we've seen Goons only really work as Zigzagoon plus Scoop Up Net. So I'm not seeing bench spaces start to get committed to a guy like this. So yeah, not too appealing. It does have an attack, but it's just 270, so it's only ever a bench-sitting guy. And for some reason, it's way more squishy than all the other ones. But yeah, a fun ability for sure. Maybe some people will build around it for damage mod. And it doesn't say that you can't stack it, right? Yeah, you can stack this as well. Pokemon recently have specifically said that you can't stack this ability on a bunch of abilities in the game. But not for this, so you actually can have a bunch of these sat around the board, which is fun. We have this Gothitelle as my throat dies. I've really been struggling with a cold and hay fever. So please excuse all the coughing and sniffing and stuff. We have Pog artwork with Golurk, but terrible text. We have a Mimikyu that stops bench Pokemon from being healed. I believe the way Malolana is written, it says switch then heal, so this would prevent Malolana, so potentially a tech card against healing, which is okay. We have another V Pokemon, the Galarian Cursula V, 190 hit points, Psychic type with Dark weakness is a little bit sketchy already. It does have Fighting Resist though, so something to bear in mind. As Dark gets better, the Fighting decks might become a counter, and then you're sort of sat in the middle there. You have this Eating Aura ability. As long as this Pokemon is your active, when your opponent attaches an energy from their hand to one of their Pokemon, put 3 damage counters on that Pokemon. So maybe we're going to see this Cursula Arctozolt list, where you're just not allowing your opponent to attach energies. Maybe you play Energy Disruption on top of that, and they're like self-damaging all their dudes. You have the Hallow Missile, 60 and 3 counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon in any way that you like. So very, very low damage output in general. So it's not really good enough to be just a wall, not enough damage from the Eating Aura. and not enough damage from its attack, so probably just a flop. We have a Flygon, stage 2, 150 hit points. If this Pokemon is your active, your opponent's active can't retreat. So it's basically the stats of the old Plasma Snorlax, but on a stage 2, which sucks. You have Desert Geyser, 130, and if your opponent has a Stadium, you can discard it, and then if you do, your opponent's next turn prevent all damage and effects done to this Pokemon by attacks of your opponent's Pokemon. So you really, really heavily punish them playing down Stadiums, but this is just so much work. Yeah, stage 2s need a lot to be good right now. Hippowdon, flipping some coins, we're not interested in that. We have a Rhyperior V. Fighting's a decent type going into this new set, I would say. Or definitely a better type than we've seen recently. Drill Run does 80, discard an energy from one of your opponent's active Pokemon. And Heavy Rock Cannon, 210. This Pokemon can't use its attack during your next turn. I'm pretty sure this is worse than Sandaconda in every way, so yeah. Persimmon, terrible. Spinarak Ariados has an interesting ability. It's Spider Net. When you play this card from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may switch one of your opponent's evolution Pokemon with that active. So it's situational, but Eternatus is certainly looking for dark bench Pokemon because its damage output scales exactly with dark Pokemon. So you really, really want to have a bunch of dark Pokemon viable. Now, I don't think Ariados is the one. It's a little bit too situational because you're only able to move their evolution out of the way. And a bunch of decks won't be playing evolutions. So I think Ariados might be like a 1-1 line in Eternatus, but I don't see it being a focal point. We come to probably easily the best card of the set, right? Crobat V, 180 hit point dark type that has 1 retreat cost and a fighting weakness, interestingly enough. It has the ability Night Asset. Once during your turn, you may play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench. You may draw until you have 6 in your hand. You can't use more than 1 Night Asset ability during your turn. So it's the return of Shaman EX. Obviously, you can only use it once, so it is a lot more fair. It is still squishy and can be punished by people simply gusting this up for an easy 2-prize knockout. Obviously, it competes with Dedenne and Eldegoss. Now, similar to Eldegoss, you're not great catcherable, so you do have that going for you over Dedenne. Dedenne is normally a deeper dig into the deck, but this Night Asset sounds obviously like it's a 4 of in Eternatus, like immediately. It's probably going into a handful of other decks as well because you have peers that could potentially be like a supporting option in a few decks. If you have like a Galarian Zigzagoon or 2 in your list with Scoop Up Nets, and then you play like 1 or 2 Crobat, it just means like Piers is like just a good card in most decks. And this just gets you extra draw. I think it's really important to have extra draw in the early game, especially when you're not able to play a supporter turn 1. So I'm really happy to see Crobat V come into the game. It doesn't have a Sky Return style effect either, so it can't just be like immediately bounced for spam usage. And obviously it's not going to be insane in combo decks because people can only use 1 Dedenne and 1 Crobat. So obviously it is extra push compared to previously, but they can't use supporters at least on turn 1, and you can't just spam like quad Crobat on turn 1 to get, you know, all your crushing hammers, all your super scoop ups and all that sort of stuff. So yeah. Its attack is Poison Fang. For dark colors, you do 17. Your opponent's active is poison. So yeah, it's literally here for the ability and the ability alone. But that ability is crazy busted, especially for Eternatus. We do have a new Galarian Obstagoon line. The Zigzagoon is obviously worse than the current one we have, as is the Linoon. But the Galarian Obstagoon is obviously very different from the one that we've come to see, where it's more of an attacker with Obstruct, more of a like key concept. But this Obstagoon looks like more of a potential tech card, I want to say. Definitely an interesting card for control, because once during your turn, you may have your opponent discard cards from their hand until they have 4 cards left. Definitely nice for just hurting your opponent's resources, hurting their options a lot of the time, really punishing decks that want to build that big sort of hand. So that Mad Ruler seems really, really annoying for just disrupting combos against people. Now, could this also be an option in Eternatus? Potentially with Piers as like a key part of the engine. Potentially you can play Galarian Obstagoon. I'm pretty sure you're always playing a thick Linoon line in the Eternatus list just to push extra damage counters around the place. So you might play actually a thick Obstagoon line, play like one of this and then like two of the damaging Galarian Obstagoons. That could definitely be an option. So I like the disruption element that you have. As soon as you get this guy out, you're really limiting your opponent's options. You're making them play a research every turn, basically. You're making it harder for them to be able to construct combos all at once. So it seems like a good card for sure. It does have 180 damage on Knuckle Impact for a 3 CE as well. So if you need it to get in there and start doing something, you could. But I am imagining this mostly being like a bench tech Dark Ruler kind of thing in Eternatus. Now, I haven't tried to theory craft Eternatus too much. So this could easily end up being too clunky and you just play Crobats, Zigzagoons, and Eternatus itself in maximum copies and say that's enough. But this Goon ability is annoying for sure. Artwork appreciation for Scraggy. This has already made it out there onto the Facebook pages and everyone's loving it. We have a Scrafty that does 90 and 90 more if you played a Piers this turn. Probably too situational. We've seen this flop with all sorts of cards previously because you can't play a Piers every single turn. And the attack cost is awkward. We have a Hooper that can do 90 for 1 on a Dark attachment, but you can't use this attack, or it does nothing if it moved from the bench to the active this turn. So yeah, it needs to be your starting Pokemon, or you need something to have been knocked out and you can just finish something off with a Hooper with 1 attachment. I feel like this could also make it into Eternatus, because you're normally doing that like around 200 damage output with the Eternatus. So having Assault Gate as a 1 prize option to just finish things off seems decent. So yeah, it could be another include in Eternatus. And also it could just be like you play 4 of this card because it's your best lead and it's just immediate early pressure on the board. 90 for 1 is very, very good value. So yeah, I could see this certainly being a card because that turn 1 tempo is good. And we have things like Rose for acceleration onto the Eternatus itself. So something to bear in mind for sure. We have, here it is. I've mentioned Eternatus a bunch. Let's get into it. 220 hit point, Dark type, basic. With the attack, firstly, Power Excel. For colorless, you do 30 and attach a Dark from your hand to one of your bench Pokemon. So it's not the best acceleration you'd like to see because it has to be from hand. Not always the most consistent, but it's something that you can do. And then you have the Dynamax Cannon for Dark and 3 colorless, which is pretty expensive. You do 120 if your opponent's active Pokemon is a VMAX. You do 120 more damage. I think this is basically never happening because it's super expensive. And even if it is, like, it's against a VMAX, so you're not even like one-shotting them. So yeah, very, very average, but thematic for the Eternatus, I guess, if you've played the games. The Eternatus VMAX, 340 hit point Dark type that has the ability Infinity Zone. If all of your Pokemon in play are Dark, you may now have up to 8 Dark Pokemon on your bench, and you can't play any other type of Pokemon. The ability, when this ability no longer works, discard your bench Pokemon until there are 5 left. So yeah, pretty wild. It's a situational Skyfield built in to this card, which is pretty wild. We're seeing the fat bench come back, which is going to be a pain for PTCGO, but it's going to be cool to see for sure. A lot of people were fans of Mega Ray back in the day, and the Dread End is exactly that. You do 30 times the number of your Dark Pokemon in play for a Dark and colorless. So yeah, pretty good scaling. Seems decent. You're probably going to need Goons, like I say, if you want to push some extra damage output here and there. So I'm imagining there's going to be pure Eternatus builds that are just heavy Crobat, Eternatus, Hooper, and Zigzagoons with scoop up nets, and then potentially a list that plays Obstagoons for more damage output, potentially so you can take additional bench damage knockouts on like Jirachi and evolving things, whilst also smacking the active for decent chunks. Obviously you're getting through things that aren't VMAXs a lot of the time here with that full 8 bench, so certainly decent damage output. You've got good consistency behind you of Crobats, and we have a decent number of basic dark Pokemon that we can just put into our list. So yeah, definitely seems reasonable for sure. This card seems very, very good. I know a lot of people are hyped on this. It is just trying to punch the face all the time. And it is a 3-prize Pokemon, so I don't think it's going to be the be-all and end-all, but it does sound like it's consistent. It does seem like it has space for tech Pokemon, and it seems like it hits a decent range of damage a lot of the time and is pretty flexible in doing so. Obviously, there's a big downside to only playing one type. You shut off your options for a lot of good cards in the game, but I do expect this card to still make a decent showing for itself into the new format. And obviously, being a dark type, you are making fighting Pokemon more relevant in the game, and you're also punishing Dragapult or making life more difficult for Dragapult VMAX to be a safe deck in the format. So yeah, something to bear in mind. It may push Dragapult slightly out of the format or make it a more rogue deck for sure. We have another VMAX line here, the Sizzle V, another great artwork appreciation. Look at that action pose for Sizzle. It has the attack Tear Off for a metal, you do 30, discarding a tool and a special energy from one of your opponent's active Pokemon. Tool-wise, I don't think there's too many that are too painful. I think right now it's only really like Big Charm that's seeing a lot of play. Maybe that Cape that we're going to see in the future. Special energy-wise, there's actually a decent chunk where this can be annoying. Obviously, the new Dark Special Capture Energies get stronger with Peers potentially, and there's Colorless Attack Cost with Eternatus as well, of course. So, and there's Speed Lightning, there's Horror, Psychic. So yeah, a lot of good special energies out there right now that you can take off. This is basically the Cobalian's attack, Cobalian EX from way back when. Or more recently, the Drampa's attack, I guess you could say. So yeah, but you also hit tools as well, which is pretty decent. Slash Claw does 140 for 3. Expensive, but never forget that metals do have the sources that can make it a little bit cheaper. As we look at the Sizzle VMAX, 320 hit points, and it has Hard Scissors for a metal colorless 19. During your next turn, this takes 30 less damage from attacks, so pretty tanky. And it also has the Max Steel Spike, which for metal colorless does 190. For me, it seems a little bit outclassed by Copperaja, so I'm a little bit worried about that for sure. It doesn't seem like it's a big payoff. Skarmory scrapping off some tools as well. We have Clink that can search for a metal and get it straight to your hand. A metal Pokemon, I should say. As can the Clang. And then we have Kling Clang. It's a 150 hit point stage 2. Has Simple Beam, 2 for 60. And Clockwork, metal, colorless for 200. If there are no Clink or Clang on the bench, this attack does nothing. It's basically irrelevant text because if you don't have a Clink or Clank on the bench anyway, like you're never going to win the game because your one Clink Clang dies and then you lose the game. 200, not a great number, super clunky, so yeah. We have another Copperaja, 190 hit point, stage 1. Things are getting wild out here. It has the Antibacterial Skin ability. This Pokemon can't be affected by special conditions. And it also has Revenge Stomp for metal, and 2 colorless. You do 120. If any of your bench Pokemon have any damage counters on them, this is 120 more damage. So again, sticking with the usual criticisms, it's clunky, it's expensive. The damage output's good, but yeah, a lot going on there. We've got a Kangaskhan, which is doing 30 and 90 more as a revenge style attack. Good to see that come back with Twin Energy being a thing in the game, but not really doing too much. Dunsparce discards the top cards of your opponent's deck, but not too interesting. And yeah, I think that's getting us towards the bottom, but we do have... No, we still have a couple cards, actually. We have the Salamence V and VMAX. So the regular V, 220 hit point, colorless type, with resistance to fighting. Weakness to lightning, as I keep saying, is still awkward, because Bolton I don't think will die, but Pikarom might get substantially worse. So yeah, the weakness is still a little bit annoying. You have Transflight, you do 30 to each of your opponent's Pokemon, which is kind of okay for setup damage, which is actually relevant when you look at the VMAX later down the line. Heavy Storm doing 160 for 4 is not great, but the Salamence VMAX has 320 hit points, again colorless type, so it's got all these sorts of accelerators available to it. Like I said, I should have mentioned Transflight again. When you're a colorless guy, you can use Welder and stuff, do that in a turn. and do a big spread of damage. The Twin Sonic for a colorless does 40 to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon, which again, selective damage. If you've done those early 30 damage prods, it can be pretty decent. Again, Zigzagoon, Scoop Up Net, these are all things you can think about. And you have this Max Wing that does 240. During your next turn, this Pokemon can't use Max Wing. A bunch of things are hitting that 240 being like the new floor for a bunch of attacks. Feels like you're hitting into VMAXs for a 2-shot comfortably always, even through like Malolanas, now that you're hitting that 240 range. And otherwise, like everything else that isn't a VMAX just immediately dead. So 240 being like a new baseline is very interesting. I like that this has triple acceleration available to it, has welder available to it. But yeah, ultimately, weak to lightning makes me a little bit scared, to be honest. And then we have the other pieces of the Bird Keeper combo, I guess. Starly allows you to ignore the attack cost. If you use Bird Keeper, you get to search your deck for any 2 cards, then shuffle your deck. Not good at all. Even if I was playing the Bird Keeper deck, I don't think I'd played Starly, to be honest. Pretty poor. We have more artwork appreciation for my boy Staraptor, one of my favorite Pokemon. We have just Swanna to end on, so the last of the Bird Keeper package. Probably the most promising one, to be honest. It's a free retreating, stage 1, 110 hit point colorless type that has the Sky Circus ability, same as all the others. So I guess it's just going to be the Sky Circus deck, similar to the Cataday deck, really. Feather Slash does 70. You may discard a card from your hand if you do 70 more damage. What I do like about the Swanna is, unlike the Rowlet and the Starly, where they're basically useless when you don't use a Bird Keeper, this at least has triple acceleration. So you could play 4 triple acceleration, 4 Bird Keepers, and then have, you know, ways of recovering Bird Keeper, like Delcatty potentially, or just the usual stuff, Mewtwo, Eldegoss, Power Pad, that sort of stuff. But the payoff is just 140 damage. 140 is just not great damage. You're gonna have a bit more space than traditional decks to actually get things rolling. Maybe get some tech cards in there to maybe push that damage output a little bit. But I think similar to Cataday, you just don't have the raw output at your disposal. But I always like playing around with decks that can potentially play 0 energies, or at least a very low energy count, because it gets you so much space inherently, which is cool. So yeah, might be worth playing around with for fun. But that is going to be my first impressions of this set. I think just a quick rundown. Turbo Patch, worse than Elixir, but still may see play in niche situations. Toughness Cape is going to be a nice health buff for sure. I was excited by Bird Keeper when I thought about a skateboard and its synergy with Jirachi. If Jirachi is still a big card in the format, if we're seeing 4 Scoop Up Net, 4 Switch as a thing, Bird Keeper could still be okay as a 1 or 2 of, otherwise it's just janky. Piers seems very, very good. I think there's going to be more reason to play Zigzagoon and Crobat as like potentially 2 ofs in lists, and then you play like 2 Piers in your deck because it seems like a decent card. Rose seems okay for some VMAXs that previously weren't strong enough, and also seems like a decent 1 of in Eternatus. Spike Muff, some extra damage counter placement could be good. Potentially Dragapult, potentially some new decks being born out of damage counter placement could be okay. Rose Tower seems pretty decent for stamp proofing yourself if you are an aggressive deck, and is good for that Rose combo that I mentioned. Dark Energy, good for pure attacking Obstagoon decks, good for Eternatus, good for all that sort of stuff. This seems pretty bad, and I didn't see many good colorless attacking Pokemon. Maybe Swanna can use it. Outside of that, not great. Oh, maybe even Salamence could use it. Okay, so there are a couple of colorless guys. As for the interesting attacking Pokemon, Eternatus seems nuts. I also think that Hooper is really good. The more I think about it, that early pressure is pretty crazy. I do like that. Kind of reminds me of Zapdos pressure, which is pretty cool. What else we got going on? An annoying ability on the Obstagoon. We got Crobat, which is going to be like in a ton of decks and is going to be busted. We got ourselves some irrelevant fighting stuff, some irrelevant psychic stuff. We've got some irrelevant lightning stuff, irrelevant water stuff. We've got all those simmies that isn't all that impressive. I actually quite like the Houndoom. I was pretty impressed by that card. I think that has a chance of seeing some play. And then we've got that headache of the Decidueye. So yeah, that pretty much wraps things up. Let me know what caught your eye in the reveal of Infinity Zone. Did I get anything wrong? Was there anything I'm underestimating, overestimating? I'll hear it all in the comments below. There's obviously more cards being added to this Darkness Ablaze set, and you do have to bear in mind that basically as soon as we get that set, there's going to be an imminent rotation, so do take that with a pinch of salt when you are thinking of some combos, potentially. I tried to recollect everything important that was rotating. I basically just mentioned a skateboard a bunch of times, and Pikarom getting worse, but that is the general biggest couple of things that go, really. Like I said, I will be doing a rotation video soon. I'll also be doing the other first impression videos for the rest of the complete Japanese sets as they come out, so we can start getting a picture of what the August set will look like. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Good luck to you in the Limitless qualifiers. Jack is going to be playing in them. I'm hoping that I can cast 1 or 2 of the games. We'll see, though. But yeah, I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.